Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Olympics Group Talk. Heading into the Olympics, this short and special series will include 3 total episodes previewing all 12 teams. Each episode will highlight one of the groups, which includes 4 nations. Now, to make it just a little bit more special because the Olympics is that, I'll be joined by a special guest to take a deep dive into one of the nations as I then preview the 3 other teams in the group. Highlighting Australia in Group B, I'll be joined by a very special Samantha Lewis, who is a digital sports journalist specializing in Australian women's football and women's football more broadly for ABC News. She covers everything between the grassroots up to the international level and the big stage competitions of the World Cup and the Olympic Games. She's also one of the co-hosts on the Far Post podcast, which is a women's football podcast for ESPN Australia. So without further ado, let's get chatting with Sam. Hello, everybody. I have got Sam here with me, getting her first cap on the channel. Sam,
Woohoo!
how are you
What a
doing
thrill.
today?
Oh, honored to get my first cap. Absolutely.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm so excited to talk about Australia today. There was practically no better person to get on than you. So I'm very excited to jump on and chit chat about the team who has had quite the stories around them last few months, rightfully so. And I think one of the recent stories is obviously the Olympic roster, which to me felt like one of the few rosters that didn't have a huge shock element to it, which I guess is a good thing sometimes. No major surprises. You wouldn't look at it and take a few sides back. What are your initial thoughts looking at the 18 players plus the alternate list that is going to be headed to Paris? It's got a few new faces, first time Olympians, a good mix of veterans. How do you assess the team that's headed off to Paris now?
Yeah, my reaction to the squad was pretty much the same as yours. And I remember on the day that it was announced, I was sort of milling around with a bunch of other Australian journos, and we were kind of like, what's the story here? Like it's kind of it's a nothing story because it's the team that everyone expected. It's the team that we had seen over the past couple of windows. And those who were kind of on the fringes ended up being the reserves that most people expected as well. So it was kind of hard to write about it because kind of nothing happened. But as you said, that's actually a really good thing. You don't want a head coach springing a surprise on you so close to a major tournament.
Mm.
So for the Matildas, we've seen over the past 2 major tournaments in particular that the consistency of the roster is actually really important. And Tony Gustafsson has spoken a lot in the past about how statistically, teams that are the most consistent in terms of their lineups tend to be the ones that go the furthest in both men's and women's major tournaments. And so that was partly the justification for why we saw the team that we did during the Women's World Cup, which was basically the same starting 11, barring a couple of injuries. But the consequence of that, of course, is that they got all the way to the tippy top of the tournament and were absolutely exhausted by the end of it and just sort of crumbled against Sweden in that 3rd place playoff. So, and also against England, to be fair, in that semi-final.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the balance that you have to strike, especially coming into a tournament like an Olympic Games where the squad size is much smaller, down from 23 at the World Cup to just 18 players.
Mm.
And the turnaround between games is also really tight. So there's not a lot of time for rest. That you really have to use kind of every player that you've got at your disposal in order to just have the longevity and just the perseverance to get to the very end of this crazy thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the squad, yeah, it was pretty it was expected. Most people here were not shocked by the selections. I mean, the only sort of potential talking point that we were able to get from it was the decision to leave out Charlotte Grant, to have her as an alternate player instead of Caitlin Torpey, a young
Mm.
defender/winger who has kind of burst onto the scene really recently with the Matildas, but has just gone from strength to strength in the past few windows. So that was they were the only 2 who were kind of like, it could be her or it could be her, and it
Mm.
just ended up falling one way and not another. But I guess the biggest talking point more generally with the Matildas coming into this tournament is, what are they going to do without Sam Kerr? It's been a big existential question really as
Yeah.
Matildas fans for a long time, as long as we've been watching this generation of players, because Sam Kerr has been at the helm of that, and she has been so crucial to so much that they've done.
Mm.
And even looking back at the last Olympics back in Tokyo, I mean, she was absolutely pivotal to Matildas getting to the fourth place finish that they got there. She scored over half of their goals. She was really, really critical in some of those playoff games, just in terms of her energy, her pressing, her leadership on the field. Like, how do you replace that? So we've had a veteran player named Michelle Heyman come back into the Matildas fold, 35 years old. She won the Golden Boot here in Australia in the most recent A-League women's season. So she was in great form. But I think it speaks more to perhaps the lack of depth that we've got as a
Mm.
nation in terms of strikers, that we've had to call upon an older player
Mhm.
whose last Olympic Games was back in 2016 in
Yeah.
Rio in order to come in and fill this gap. So, yeah, that was kind of the major, I guess, narratives coming out of that squad selection. But overall, I think most people were pretty okay with it.
I'm actually glad you highlighted that attacking line and the bunch of the attackers or forward players that could be occupying that area of the pitch with Sam Kerr being out. And almost in some ways, in a very brutal manner, they got to deal with that problem at the World Cup and see how they can adjust without Sam Kerr in that front
Yeah.
line. And I think a player that you've highlighted uh, in 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 ways of like how do we use her is Mary Fowler, who's not misused, but it's almost like we haven't seen the best of Mary Fowler across the last few windows. How do you see her role going into this Olympics? Once again, there's no Sam Kerr. I thought she ended the season pretty relatively well with City, but like you have written and covered as well, she's had to deal with injuries, which, hit a lot of the consistency. But how do you see them rotating those front players? Because they're going to have to be scoring goals, especially with the opposition that they'll be facing in the group, which, we'll touch about in just a moment.
Yeah, so there are two sort of interesting parts to that question. So the first is kind of the rotation of attacking players, and how do you find a way to make the Matildas an attacking threat without their best attacking threat? And as you said, we did see variations of that during the Women's World Cup. We saw, for example, Emily Van Egmond, who had kind of been on the sidelines, on the fringes of the team for a while, thrown back into the fold and played as a bit more of a false nine slash
Hmm.
number 10. So she was that sort of taller, deeper lying attacking player who was able to turn on the ball and unleash our two very quick wingers in Hayley Rasso and Caitlin Ford. And that was really, really fruitful for us against a number of different opponents. And of course, Caitlin Ford scored the winning goal against Denmark, which got us through to the game against France. Like, it was a lot of those players, and I think the style of that play is really suited to the Matildas, that kind of very quick transitional, athletic, wide, dynamic play. So
Yeah.
having the option of a Van Egmond to come in and do that was quite good. It worked in terms of the bigger system. And Mary Fowler during that World Cup contributed to that as well. I mean, she put the ball through for Caitlin Ford, of course, and she was really crucial in that sort of floating, attacking midfield kind of role.
Mhm.
But to the second part of the question on Fowler, she's a real enigma of a player for the Matildas at the moment, because she is so good in so many areas of the field. And that's a real problem, because when you've got a player like a Caitlin Ford, say, who is a terrific world-class left winger, you know that that is her best spot. You know that that is how to maximize her potential. You know the kind of players to put around her in order to ensure that she reaches that potential. But with Mary Fowler, she can play sort of anywhere in an attacking or a wide or a central role. And so because she's good at so many things, she's kind of not excellent at just one thing. And that's really tricky when you've got a player as talented as Mary, who in any other team would kind of be the player that you build the rest of the team around. Such is her excellence.
Mhm.
But because she can kind of float everywhere and do everything, it's really hard to find a structure or a system that can be consistent around a player who is not consistent in that way.
Mhm.
And I think another issue that Fowler has, and perhaps this is just because she's still quite young, she's only 20 years old, which is baffling to me, is that she can sometimes go missing in games. Some big name players, when they go missing, they still can kind of do things. But when Fowler goes missing, she really goes missing. She doesn't contribute to the game at all. So I think going forward for Mary, one of her biggest areas of growth is trying to impact every game that she's in, regardless of where she's being played. And I'm going to be really curious to see what happens at this Olympic Games, because the rotation, as we've mentioned, the back-to-back games as well, and the turnaround between them, as well as the different kinds of opposition teams that we're going to be coming up against. It's going to require a lot of different things from the Matildas, and a lot of different things potentially from Mary Fowler as well. So whether she's able to overcome that missingness, that tendency to kind of disappear, or whether she's really able to knuckle down and find the position that works the best for her and for the team around her as well, I think that could potentially be one of the defining features in terms of how far the Matildas can actually get in this Olympic Games, because she is a terrific player, but she needs to be played in the right way for the rest of the team to benefit from that.
I think you describing her as an enigma is really the most accurate way because and I think oddly enough, like you mentioned, the Olympics with the brutal schedule that it brings, the brutal group that Australia have, it might play in her favor that, like you mentioned, she's good at a lot of things, maybe not excellent at one thing. And kind of to jump into that is that who when you look at the squads and perhaps again this Olympics who is different than a World Cup and different than your regular competitions, who would you say is a player to watch out for where opposition, when she's got the ball, they'll be thinking twice?
Mm. I think we've got a couple, and I don't just say that because I'm a Matilda stan, but I've already mentioned Caitlin Ford, who I think has been absolutely sensational in the sort of vacuum that's been created in the absence of Sam Kerr. I think Ford has really become the attacking leader in that
Mm,
way. She has been so important in so many important moments. And I am forever indebted to whoever it was that convinced her to move to Arsenal, because she has just improved beyond what anyone here ever thought that she could. She's so much faster. She's so much fitter. She's smarter. Technically, she's so much sharper. She knows what she wants to do all the time. And she's just able to impact games and really take big moments in her hands. Not a lot of players can do that. So I think the mentality that she's developed while being in Arsenal has really helped the Matildas to grow in that
mm,
way. So I think Caitlin Ford is a really, really significant player for us for this Olympics. But I think there are a couple of others who I think folks should probably keep an eye on. One is, I mean, she may not get a huge amount of time on the field, but Caitlin Torpey, as I mentioned at the top, is a really exciting young player who I think has a very long future in the Matildas. She's very versatile. She is a young sort of wing back, I suppose, is her best position. She can play either as a fullback or as a winger. She's very, very smart. Her football IQ is excellent. Technically, she's still growing a little bit, and joining San Diego Wave over in the NWSL recently is potentially going to help with that. But already, I mean, she debuted for the Matildas less than a year ago, and already she's finding some really good combinations with some of her teammates around her. So I think if you know you get to a point in a tournament where you do need to lean into your players and lean into the rotation and try and find backups for a
mhm,
player such as an Ellie Carpenter or a Hayley Rasso, you know, those quick right-sided athletic players who need a rest or they get injured, God forbid, then you'll see probably a Caitlin Torpey come on and I think really hold her own in that way. And that's really exciting to me as well. So
mm,
yeah, I think those two are ones to keep an eye on. But the other potential big question mark with this Matildas team is Katrina Gorry,
mm,
who was so central to the Matildas run during the Women's World Cup. She really was the kind of metronome of that team. She was the player that dictated the tempo, that dictated
mm,
the momentum. She did so much in so many ways. But she's actually spent most of this year on the sidelines. She copped a pretty serious ankle injury for West Ham towards the back end of the WSL season and then had to get surgery on that ankle. And so she's been out of Matilda's camp for a good 4-ish months at this point.
mm,
She missed the last window because she wasn't quite ready. But she's been called up to the Tokyo Olympics, which she said in the past is probably going to be her last as well. So she's got a really crucial role to play, not just individually, but also the chemistry that she has with the players around her, especially Kyra Cooney-Cross, also in midfield. That's really pivotal. And so for me, the upcoming friendly against Canada, the last game that they'll play before the Olympics, is going to be the last chance that we get to see whether Katrina Gorry is really ready for this, because
Yeah.
coming back to be able to just play a game of football after a major injury is one thing, but getting back to international level, that's a real ask, especially after spending so much time on the sidelines. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. Keep an eye on it.
It's always a bit weird with injuries because obviously the head coaches of the national team know a little bit more information to as where the players are in their recovery, how fit they are. But I mean, you've just highlighted match fitness is so wildly different to just being able to do great on like a beep test kind of fitness. Um,
Mm.
and I think, yeah, that she was really the oil to the engine of how the Matildas did at the World Cup. And, her involvement cannot be understated at all. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you would coin it, but the Matildas have found themselves in the group of death as it's being coined. They certainly were also in a very, very tough group last Olympics. It was the US, who they find again here. Sweden last time, they obviously made it to the final, and New Zealand. They're getting another tough look with the US, Germany, and Zambia. And so when you look at that group, it's matchups that could perhaps be semi-final final matchups with Germany and the US. It's almost like they're getting thrown into the fire right away, which again, some teams kind of enjoy that. They're getting tested right away. Others like to start early with the Matildas, that they're coming in, obviously, in some ways have been rightfully so coined as good contenders to podium. But when you look at that group and you look at the opposition that they have, who would you say is going to give them the toughest challenge from those three different nations? I know,
Oh
horrible question, but
boy.
I've got to
Oh gosh.
ask.
Um, Look, every group is a group of death when you're at a 12-team tournament like an Olympic Games.
Yeah.
But I really do think that we're in the group of death. I really do think that this is the hardest group, because I think that every team can beat every other team. And some people call that a group of life because it means that everyone's got a chance. But for me, and for I think a lot of rusted on Matildas fans, it makes us very frightened, because the interesting thing about the Matildas is that they are just as likely to go very far in a major tournament as they are to crash out in the group stage. And we can never really know which one is going to happen. Most of the time with the national team, you kind of get a sense of how capable they are of things like this. But with the Matildas, it really is just a gamble. You can't, like, they're equally capable of doing both of those. So being a Matildas fan is a very anxiety inducing because of this. And coming into this group stage, the more that I've kind of milled on or thought about this particular group, the more worried I get. And the more games that I watch of the opposition teams as well, the more worried I get. So, I mean, the USA obviously, not just historically very dominant, but they are now emerging, I think, into the newest era that they have needed to emerge into. I think the World Cup last year was kind of the growing pains of that team, and of really needing to figure out what their next iteration was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And now under Emma Hayes, the games that I've watched them play have been terrific. They have a really clear, defined style to them. They've got players who are amazing all over the field, especially up front. And they seem to really have that kind of swaggery belief back in themselves, which they didn't have last year. And that's the thing that really worries me the most, I think, about the USA, is that they can be good, but when they know that they're good, they're even better. And it's that kind of arrogance and that mentality that really does have an
Yeah.
effect on the field. So I think with the USA, that'll probably be the biggest challenge for us. Also considering we've only ever beaten them once in our history. So it's going to be a real test in that kind of way. I think with Germany, they also didn't have a great Women's World Cup last year, famously. but I think they're going to be very angry because of that, and that also scares me. You know, they're going to be coming into this Olympics with a need for vengeance. They want to prove that they are not the team of last year. They want to show people that that was just a blip on the radar, that they are still one of the dominant forces of the women's international game. And they do still have some of the best players in world football who are at their peak in some ways as well. My question with Germany is goal scoring, I think. That's the opposite of my concern with America, because I think the US can score goals from basically anywhere. My concern with the US is more about their midfield, but my concern with Germany is about their goal scoring um, availabilities. I don't think they are necessarily um, as efficient, perhaps,
Yeah.
with their goal scoring as what they used to be. I don't know how well they have been able to replace their greatest goal scorers. You know, they've got Alex Pop sort of still around. There's a lot of dependence on her. Obviously, she's still excellent, but like similar to us with Michelle Heyman, right? It's like, who have you got coming next, though? So I think while Germany are they're a very well-rounded team, they're a very organized team. Physically, they're terrific. They've got some very good defenders and central midfielders. I think we might be okay against them if we're able to defend very well, and try and pull them apart and use that sort of wide attacking wing play that I talked about before to get in behind them, similar to what we did against Denmark.
Yeah.
But with Zambia, I think Zambia, like people are kind of thinking of Zambia as the weakest team in the group, and I worry that the Matildas players also think that, and that they'll be lured into
Right.
like a false sense of security. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I worry that it'll be the same as what happened in the World Cup against Nigeria,
Syria.
which was also our second game. They got through that first opening match against the Republic of Ireland, squeaky bum time, 1-0. And then they were like, oh, okay, gosh, we can relax. We won our first game. And when they came into that second match against Nigeria and they lost
Yeah.
because they underestimated them. Nigeria are an excellent team. They were the greatest team on the African continent for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And they got pretty heavily outplayed in that game as well. So I worry that a similar complacency could kind of seep into the Matildas in this tournament when it comes to Zambia.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also, Zambia have two of the best, most informed strikers currently in the game, in Barbara Banda and Rachel Kunananji, and they terrify me. Like, I've been watching them playing in the NWSL, and like Barbara Banda's been scoring a goal every game since she signed, which is incredible areas. The two of them are so dynamic. They are so smart. They can pounce on a mistake faster than most strikers that I've seen do.
Yeah.
And the thing about the Matildas is that we've got defenders who can be prone to a clanger every now and then.
Yeah.
They're not the fastest defenders either. Out wide, yes, but centrally, no.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Zambia know that. So the real challenge, I think, in that game is going to be basically keep the ball away from Barbara Banda and Rachel Kunananji and try and score some more goals. Because if we give them even a sniff, even a glimpse of our goal through a mistake or a slow back pass or anything like that, they are the players who will punish us for it. So yeah, overall, TLDR is I'm very worried about everyone. And I really hope that, but the thing about the Matildas is that, like, on their day, they are capable of beating anybody. And we saw that during the World Cup. We saw that during the Olympic Games where they beat Team GB. We've seen them do it again and again. And coming into this Olympics, like, if we look at the FIFA rankings, we're ranked 12. So 12 of 12 teams, based on that, we shouldn't be getting out of the group. But we know that this team can if they do the things right on the day. So again, Matildas, who knows?
It sounds like it's not a tough time, but certainly an anxiety-filled time being a Matilda's fan because
Yes.
I mean the way you've laid it out is quite. I mean, I'm already sweating, and I'm like it's and I've got enough to deal with Canada, but I'm very intrigued to see how that Zambia game plays because it really reminds me of Nigeria and the fact that it did come as that second game and that complacency in the way they can be so fast on a counter attack. That for me is almost going to be a lot of mock tests for moving,
Mm.
forward down after the group stages. You've just kind of hinted at it. The Matildas have gone really, really close to getting a medal, super close to getting on the podium. It's almost like they can do it. They're just missing one last factor. You said they can have a great run, but they can also be one of those unfortunate teams that gets cursed out and possibly has an exit for you. And kind of now we really dug deep into the players, the opposition, the run, the preparation. What is that one thing that you feel like the Matildas have not necessarily missed, but will need to get on the podium? Because they've certainly showed that they have the capabilities to do that. And I think
Mm.
anybody would be a fool to not think and look at them as real possible contenders to, get a medal out of Paris.
And this is kind of the golden question
Yeah.
for us as a country. How do we get the Matildas to just go that one step further? And looking at it holistically, and having looked at all the major tournaments that they have competed in where they have gotten so close, so like 2 fourth place finishes in the last 2 majors, the thing I think that differentiates a 4th place from a 3rd place is depth. And I say that because in the last 2 tournaments that we've seen, uh, the reason that they finished 4th is because they had a starting 11 who were fit enough to get them to that point, but
Hmm.
not fit enough to do that final thing. So I think what is going to be really important in this Olympics, and it sounds kind of boring, right? It's like rotate your players, basically. But you really need to trust your players. Like, you've brought them for a reason. And if you want to ensure that your best team is still physically and emotionally capable of getting all the way to the end and then playing what could be the biggest game of their careers after having exerted themselves against all of these world-class teams already, you have to ensure that the load is spread across all of the different players. And I think back to the World Cup last year, the semi-final against England and the 3rd place playoff against Sweden, the players just looked gassed. They looked exhausted. Um, I don't know whether that would have happened. And this is the kind of the I don't know, the
What
chicken or
ifs?
egg, or the what
Yeah.
ifs, right? Is like, would we even have got to the semi-final if we had rotated more? Would we even have got to that 3rd place game had we used more of those players? Same as the last Tokyo Olympics as well. Had we actually, like, could we have gotten that far had we not used the players that we did? But that's all hypotheticals, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think for me, when I watch those two, the end points of those 2 major tournaments, the theme that connects the 2 of them for me is energy, because the 2 Matildas teams who competed in both of those 3rd place playoff games were just wrecked. You could see that physically they just weren't capable of matching their opponents on the park in any way, in terms of their running, in terms of their passing, in terms of their tackling, in terms of their kind of decision making as well. Like, you could
Hmm.
see mentally they were very drained.
Yeah.
And I think the only way to be able to account for that is by sharing the load a bit more, by really leaning into the players that you've got, um, load managing your key players better as well. If you're up, say, 2-0 against Germany, fingers crossed, take off a Katrina Gorry and put on a Claire Wheeler, or take off a Caitlin Ford and put on a Courtney Vine. Like, you've got these players here who are capable of absorbing some of the pressure and the energy requirements of a really condensed tournament like this. You have to trust them to do that. And that's been one of the on-running sort of criticisms of Tony Gustafsson during his tenure as Matilda's coach, is that, he talks a big talk about building depth and finding more versatility in the roster and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the actual tournaments themselves, he doesn't use them.
Hmm.
So I would really like to see him change that for this Olympics, because I do think that will be the thing that could potentially differentiate another 4th place playoff from what could be the first ever medal for an Australian team at a women's football tournament at the Olympics.
It's very ironic to think about how for the Olympics, almost every manager and every person who has an opinion on how their team can get on the podium has said it's got to be the fittest team that's getting on there. But at the same time, you're talking about a very, very small roster and a very, very hectic schedule. So
Yeah.
it's the question is, how do you solve all that? And that's kind of Beth Priestman is that's what she said. Like it may not be the best team that wins this, it's the fittest team that wins this, which again, ironic the fact that it's 18 players and a very just insane schedule that they'll have to work around. Sam, I know you're going to be covering lots of the Matildas very, very deeply and very brilliantly, like you have been for so many years now. I know folks are. I mean, if folks listening don't actually already follow you when we're talking about the Matildas, you guys have been missing out. I'm gonna break it. All right. I'm not gonna even sugarcoat it and say you've not been missing out. You have been missing out. So hopefully they won't be missing out this Olympics. Where can they find your talks, your chats, your writes, and everything around the Matildas?
Yes. So anyone curious about me having a mental breakdown over the Matildas can follow me over on Twitter. And yes, I still call it Twitter. I refuse to call it X. My handle is Battle Dinosaur, which I regret to this day, inventing when I was 17, because it's too far gone now. I can't change it. Anyway, that's my Twitter. But I'm also part of the podcast, the Far Post podcast, which you can follow also on social media with some of my besties. We've been covering the women's game since the 2019 Women's World Cup. And we're going to be hopefully having some really great coverage of the Olympics throughout the entire thing, potentially all the way to the gold medal match. So yeah, go and follow us over there as well.
Absolutely. I'll be leaving all of what Sam mentioned down below in the description. Make sure you go and clicking. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today. A pleasure to chat with you. Hopefully Australia and Canada won't meet during I feel like we've seen enough matchups.
We've seen enough of each other. Look, I love you guys, but please, enough.
We've had too many matchups recently. And maybe hopefully they can share the podium. So that's hopefully what I'll be rooting for. Well, that was Sam in Australia for you. Certainly one of the teams that does have a lot of eyes on them this Olympics, especially following what a great and inspiring run they had at the World Cup. But they do have a very tough group to work with, like we just highlighted, with the likes of Germany, the US, and Zambia in with them. So let's talk a little bit about Germany, who have a little bit of a mixed record when you look at the Olympic Games. They are champions. They were champions in the 2016 Rio Olympics, but did not qualify for the Tokyo Olympics and are obviously back now here in France after beating the Netherlands in their Olympic playoff game qualifiers. Not that anybody forgot, but Germany did crash out of the Women's World Cup last summer in the group stages. They have moved on from Martina Voss-Stickelberg and are currently working with Horst Hrubesch, probably butchering his name, but he is the interim head coach, and they already have another head coach lined up after the Olympics. So this is the only competition he'll be leading them under, and he has only got gold in sight. According to him, this team is not going to walk away out of Paris without a medal around their neck. Now, I do like high aspirations, but let's talk a little bit about this team and how far can they go this tournament. Looking at the roster heading to France, no major shocks, really kind of the set of players that folks would expect. They are looking a little bit more youthful in terms of their age average this time around in comparison to the World Cup, which in some ways was a little bit of their downfall when you look and assess that backline that they were fielding pretty much the entirety of the World Cup. It was a lot of players that should have not been starting, and perhaps the young players that should have been starting were more so on the bench. Under Hrubesch, they have played a lot of different formations. They have tried different systems, which in some ways it's great because it's clear that this head coach is trying to figure out what is the best starting 11 and formation for his team. But in some ways, we haven't gotten to see a full and proper identity of what this German team looks like. We've seen a little bit of a 4-2-3-1, a 4-4-2, one that it looks like he'll be sticking with this Olympics, a 4-2-2-2 even at sometimes, a 4-3-3 even at times. So this change up of formation has not helped in terms of finding rhythm on the pitch, but it is quite understandable that this new head coach was trying different things out leading to the Olympics, because when otherwise are you going to do that? Looking at the players and looking at what this head coach has played in previous years, he's probably going to favor a 4-4-2 for the German team, especially out of possession, which is not necessarily information that I hate when you look at the players, but it's a matter of the fact that sometimes they look flat-footed when they set up in 4-4-2, and it looks like they lack a little bit of creativity up top, which is something that also Samantha has mentioned of where is this team going to score from. They certainly have the players to score up top. Under this new head coach, they have looked to play with a little bit more width. They always have their midfielders pushing pretty far out wide, and they really want to stretch the pitch as much as they can and kind of work from there. From there, they try to overload numbers in the box, send a lot of great crosses, and always be aware of the kind of deflecting, bouncing balls that can be from there. And, obviously Alex Popp is going to be their main player to look for when sending in these crosses, but she's also a player that I think the German team needs to realize cannot be their main leading striker in a competition with only 18 players with such a grueling back-to-back schedule. Laura Freigang for me is going to be a player to not only watch, but a player that I really want to get involved this tournament. If she's not starting, and unfortunately I don't think she'll be starting for the majority of the games purely because of what we've seen from this head coach, but if she cannot be coming on in the 72nd minute, she's a type of player in the re-energizer that you need to see perhaps come on like that 52nd minute. She's also a pretty good player to have from the spot, so perhaps if the game goes to a penalty shootout, she's not a bad player to be bringing on as a substitute and to also take on your penalty. But she's a player that Germany needs to learn how to involve a little bit more, which is something that they've staggered to figure out just yet before this Olympics. And something that Germany really needs to make sure they've nailed down is how to play on a transition, and that's something that transition phase for Germany almost ends prematurely, and it almost slows down prematurely, and that's something that with the group that they're looking at, they cannot not make the most out of these transitional moments. And that only requires clinical finishers up top, but that also translates into a little bit of the midfield. And listen, Germany's set of midfielders are phenomenal. They have the ability to progress the ball vertically. They also have great defensive capabilities. They know how to hold the midfield well. And when Lena Oberdorf gets going, she gets going. And when you're talking numbers and progressing the ball and having assists, Clara Bull is a fantastic player who has shown a lot of improvements in that area of her game this past season. And she's also a player that I think will be crucial in those transitional moments, in those creativity moments from behind that I guess breaks that creativity drought that we have seen Germany fall in. Germany also likes to play pretty aggressively from the back. They love to have a high line in the back, especially when they lose possession. You are going to see that back line quite up high the pitch. Julia Gwynn is back. Obviously, she was missed at the World Cup, and I think her pace and her awareness is going to be so important. I think she's a player, if she stays fit and healthy and plays pretty much all these games that Germany are going to be playing, she will have a lot of great moments, and she's going to be absolutely instrumental to how Germany do. If Hendrik is getting caught on the transition and they're playing a very high back line, she's not the fastest, so she's not the central defender you're hoping she goes back and catches the likes of like a Sophia Smith, because chances are she's not going to catch her. Julia Gwynn is the player that you're like, right, this is a race that I want to see. And obviously in goal behind them is Froms. I mean, do I need to talk about her? Like, we know she is one of the best in the game, and Katrine Berger will be acting as the second goalkeeper, who we do know too is great at penalties. If Germany are able to click, and if Germany are able to get going with the rhythm that they have and really use the most out of the squad, I want to see as much rotation as possible, because they have got so much quality and so much great talent in a lot of the areas that this team is really complete. I think if they're not rotating well, that's going to be their downfall. And I think if they look flat-footed like they have at some points, that's where I see them getting knocked out in the quarterfinals perhaps, or right after the group stages. For me, this is not a team that I'm worried about to get out of this group. I'm excited to see how they match up with the likes of Zambia, is a team who they lost to before the World Cup. That's a rematch that I know I will be sat for, and just really excited to see how that plays out. In their group are one of the big dogs of the US Men's National Team under Emma Hayes. It's a new era. We are seeing a new era too in the squad of Alex Morgan not being included. Few new fresh faces that are going to be making their Olympics debut, but I think it's really hard to see how this team does in a competition under Emma Hayes, because really we've only seen her take on this team in a few friendlies, and it wasn't against the toughest opposition that they can come up against. What we have already seen though, however, is that Emma has brought in a lot of attacking tactics to the side. They frequently set up in this almost like a 3-2-5, 3-4-3. When they're looking to build up, you see how some of the midfielders drop. They're clever with it. They want to receive the ball from the backline that's building. And that midfield for me under her has looked really fluid. Perhaps one of their biggest problems under Vlasco in that area of transition is that their midfield was the furthest thing from fluid. And under Emma Hayes, with these new attacking tactics, in my eyes, they've looked a little bit more fluid. You see Coffee typically remain deep. Horan has a little bit of the freedom to pull up and rotate potentially with anyone ahead of her. I really enjoyed their games with South Korea because you got to see how they broke down a mid-block. They broke down a low block even at times, which is something that I would anticipate Zambia put on them, a mid block or a low block. Emma Hayes is very familiar with breaking down like a West Ham low block for sure. They look so fluid in breaking that block centrally. They're very fast with moving the ball. They always had options on the flank where, they would have a quick pass and an overlap and send it into the already crowded box, and there's poachers just waiting there for it. But if that option is not available and if that option is not working, they've looked superb in the middle and they've looked really fluid in breaking down low block. They ran a lot of great combinations. I liked seeing Macario and Sophia Smith combine. I think those two is going to be a duo that any back line is not going to be having fun to defend against. I think these two are going to combine for a lot of assists and goals. Maybe I said it here first, but Macario and Sophia Smith, those two you're going to have to look out for. And contrastly, speaking of some of the blocks that they set up when they're defending, you've seen them under Emma Hayes kind of get up in this 4-4-2 and wait for the opposition to come to them rather than actually go and high press them. Is this something that Emma Hayes was trying? Maybe. Is this something that she's going to stick with? Maybe. Is she going to unleash a crazy high press engine up top? Maybe, but that's not what we saw from her with this American team. We did not see a high press. We did not see, three attacking players coming at you and gunning. They kind of set up in a 4-4-2 and go from there and defend from there. And when they've defended, and it's not like they had to do much defending against South Korea, but when they defended, they did a lot of this kind of man marking that you see with Emma Hayes. They are very close to closing down spaces. They interrupt a lot of the passing lanes of the opposition where it's almost immediately they're regaining possession. And when they regain possession, they also have a few players around them because they were also marking some of the opposition. Now, what we do know is perhaps few of the locked in players. Your Naomi Girma, she is going to be in the back. It's hard to imagine a starting 11 where she's not going to be in there. It looks like Emily Fox has looked really comfortable. Lindsay Horan, Sam Coffey, I'm going to predict are going to be the pivots that Emma Hayes is really going to favor across this. And then up top, it's hard to see a starting lineup without Macario and Smith. Like I mentioned, that duo too for me looked really just harmonized already together. This roster chat is the inclusion of Corbin Albert, which for me, putting everything aside, I'm not too sure how she cuts the even 18 player roster. Emma Hayes has mentioned that she brought her in because of the versatility that she can play in any of the three positions in the midfield. For me, I don't think I've necessarily seen that. I don't think I've seen consistency of performance to the top level, to the high standard in all three of those positions. I think maybe this is going to be something that bites them back, and because absolutely you're going to have to bring in versatile players when it's only 18 players a roster. It's a very hectic schedule. I'm not sure if she is that player to be able to rotate across that midfield and give you that opportunity to just play around with who you can pit so that you can rest and get some playing minutes for the other players. I love Jenna Niswonger. I'm excited for her. Tierna Davidson, she actually is a center back. She's definitely on hot form in front of goals, scoring goals. So maybe we'll see her lead the Golden Boot race at some point. That'll be crazy. But for, I think the US, I'm really excited to see how they fare against Australia. Usually they have gotten the best out of them, and obviously Emma Hayes knows a fair bit about the Australian players. You through Sam Kerr. Sam Kerr won't be on the pitch there, but certainly has a very good read of them. But it's an established Australian side that has gone through the competitions that they have over the last 2 years. It's the same head coach, primarily kind of the same players as Sam highlighted, pretty much the players that we saw go to the World Cup, against this new US Women's National Team set of players. It's a new head coach, new tactics that they're trying to drill out, and it's in a very tough circumstances. I think for me, the biggest, or not the biggest, but the toughest game that I'll be certainly keeping my eyes on in this group is going to be the US against Australia. Those three big dogs going at it is going to be thrilling. I think it's going to be huge fireworks, but really the big dark horse here and the big team that can upset those teams and take off their points is going to be Zambia, which I am so, first of all, thrilled and happy that they're in this competition. They're making their debut. I mean, what a few years it has been for Zambia, making the World Cup debut, making it now their Olympics debut. I've talked a little bit about the rise of Zambian women's football and how that has gone to this stage, so that's not the purpose of the talk today. But this is a really, really exciting team. They're a super fast team on the transition and on the break. They're a very clinical passing team. I think when you look at their passing percentages, they look quite threatening from there. And for me, more than anything, the Zambian team is a really, really disciplined squad. And if you're done of listening to my voice and you want to see how Zambia is a really disciplined side, I recommend you go back and watch their game against Spain at the World Cup. It's a game they lost. Spain is a very scary side, point blank and simple. They can attack from anywhere. They can hurt you from anywhere. One of those anywheres is on the counterattack and it's on the transition. But Zambia just could not be beat on that. And the way the Zambian players go back into the back line and the way the midfielders reposition themselves in exactly where they need to be in such a quick, fast manner makes this side really, really fun to watch. And a disciplined side can be frustrating. Like I mentioned, they're fast on the break. They're very, very physical. They're really accurate in their passes, which is what makes them kind of scary on that break, is that they can get your one or two passes to exactly the player they need to. Whether they finish and whether they're clinical is a completely different story. They're going to look to frustrate their opponents and they're going to look to pounce on their mistakes. Now for Zambia, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that their quality is better than all the other teams, because it's not. When you look at the caliber of players, they certainly fall behind from that. I think there are concerns in the midfield where, for me, they lack a holding midfielder, a really strong defensive midfielder. Now, their midfielders put in the extra work and the extra mile of running to go back and defend and help their back line. But perhaps this extra bit of work comes because of they don't have a proper defending midfielder. They do not have a central midfielder that drops deep and holds. They have a lot of different profiles in the midfield. They have different looks and different attributes that they put together, but none of them fit of what you would expect a holding midfielder to have. And it's almost like the midfield that they do occasionally roll out with is going to be their midfield to go, which is why I see the Zambian side, specifically their starting 11, to be more so one-dimensional. I don't think opponents are going to be too surprised to see what Zambia's starting 11s are going to be. They have been very, very consistent from the pre-World Cup preparation to the World Cup to now post-World Cup, and they've played a lot of crucial games, including this Olympics qualifier. And being one-dimensional may have gotten you okay results at the World Cup, but it's not going to get you okay results at the Olympics, particularly because of the very just tough schedule that they're going to be working with. There's no doubt the duo of Banda and Kudanji up top can really hurt. Barbara Banda is coming off a fine form now heading into the Olympics. She's second in the NWSL Golden Race boot, right behind Temwa Chawinga. So she is going to pounce on the opportunity, and I think this is what Sam was alluring to earlier, is that they can punish you and they can be really, really physical in the midfield, kind of dispossess you from there, have a really accurate pass to Barbara Banda, and the rest is history, really. They could upset some teams here. They could pull in 2 draws. I don't know who against, but if you see them pick a point or 2, I wouldn't be surprised. Do I see them getting a win? I think that is asking a little bit too much, particularly because they're debuting into this competition. They haven't done this before. It's really, really hard opponents they're coming up against. Not to say that, the likes of Spain wasn't tough to get up against, or Costa Rica. Costa Rica's game was really fun, actually, with Zambia. I'd recommend you go and watch that one. The Zambia gets out of it, it's a tough ask, but Zambia will be a fun team to watch and they will definitely deliver. For me, the 2 teams that definitely get out of this are going to be the US and Australia. I think Germany could perhaps fall into the trap of feeling flat-footed up top. Now, in the Olympics, that third finishing team can go and advance depending on the rankings with the 3 other teams. So Germany could fall into that third spot if their attacking is not clicking and if they look a little too slow and flat-footed. But, if they end up in third, they can still go through. It'll be interesting. But for me, it is the US and Australia that will definitely book their ticket out of the group stages. Group B is going to be bonkers, pun intended. Let me know if you have enjoyed this episode of Olympics Group Talk. I'm certainly having lots and lots of fun talking about all 12 teams heading into the Olympics this summer. Let me know what you thought of my chat with Sam and all those 3 teams that I just previewed. There's 2 more episodes coming at you for Group A and C, and those will also be just as exciting. So to be able to stick around and watch those, make sure you subscribe to me down below and follow me on Twitter. And to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, I will see you later.